Editor of the Brazilian Report, also in Sao Paulo. Euan, welcome. So if Lula does indeed win this election, what changes in Brazil? Will there be an immediate change in tone?
Well, I think one of the first things that Lula is going to have to pay attention to is the fact that his entire campaign has been built on a massive broad front against Jair Bolsonaro. So a lot of the people who are involved in the Lula campaign are parties which are not typically allied with Lula. His vice president, for example, is someone who actually ran against Lula in the presidential election. So what he's going to have to do is kind of conciliate all of these different forces and work out exactly how he's going to govern if he wins the election, obviously.
Do you see many parallels to the 2020 election in the United States? I mean, there's a lot of the same rhetoric, the same threats, the same kinds of divisions, and even some of the same issues at stake here.
Well, I think if the polls ring true and we get a similar result today from what we've seen in the opinion polls, then it will actually be quite different from the recent election in the US, because Lula will have won the election by a much larger margin than Biden did in the US. But still, you know, Bolsonaro has sought to kind of copy Trump a little bit. Trump has actually sought to copy Bolsonaro a little bit. So they're similar proposals under very different contexts. We can definitely expect some form of disruption, or at least some attempt to disrupt the post-election period from Jair Bolsonaro, but we'll have to wait and see exactly what shape that takes.
Also, you have the question hanging out there of why would Bolsonaro even raise that specter? How would that possibly benefit him going into an election where he could use some extra points?
Well, the thing is, Jair Bolsonaro, he has always sought to speak to his kind of radical base, because even since he was elected, he has this really strong kind of consistent core of about 30% of the electorate.
But does that gain votes? I mean, he is speaking to his base. I don't know why they would be excited by the prospect of, calling into question an otherwise fair election that he didn't contest in the past when he won. So that kind of rhetoric, especially when you see what happened in the United States, how could that gain him votes that he needs?
And yeah, exactly. That's the question, because the moderate voters who are just, they've tired after this COVID pandemic, which claimed over 600,000 lives in Brazil, and, the economic difficulties, that moderate voters are not interested in that sort of rhetoric from Bolsonaro. So that is probably one of the reasons why he will end up losing this election, because it's not something that speaks to your average voter in Brazil at the moment.
Are people there afraid of violence after the election? Is that threat, do they think, very real or just rhetoric? And have authorities tried to put in some safeguards and extra security in case that does happen?
Well, yeah, this campaign has been riddled with a lot of isolated cases of political violence, often using firearms or other weapons. And it has always been one way, as in from pro-Bolsonaro supporters targeting Lula supporters. And so, yeah, I think it would be natural to expect that violence to continue in this post-election period, especially if we have to go to a second round runoff. But also, electoral courts have, they've pulled their finger out a little bit, and they've changed rules on gun carry licenses around Brazil, especially around polling places. So they're trying to hope that maybe they could reduce the potential for gun violence if less people are allowed to carry the weapons.
Very interesting. We see live pictures there. Brazil is getting ready to see the results, which could come in within the next few hours. Euan, excellent conversation. Really appreciate it.